Hello everybody, my name is Zach with Overrated Gamers, and today we're going to be starting a 6-part series on 5-color commander decks. Today's commander deck is going to be Super Friends, but I'll get to that in just a moment. First, I actually wanted to start out with explaining why I have 6-color decks, and why it isn't costing me a fortune to build all of them. The reason for that is because each of them shares about a core of between 60 and 67 cards, depending on the build. So for the most part, I just swap out between 30, sometimes 35 cards, including the commander, and I'm able to build multiple different decks with them. So for this series, we're first going to go over the core of the deck, and then we'll get to the cards that make it into the Planeswalker deck. First off, we have our commander for Super Friends, or 5-color Planeswalkers. I like to use Sliver Queen. It's 1 mana of every color. It's a 7/7, and it has pay 2 mana, put a 1/1 Sliver creature token into play. She's just a good value engine. She hits a player 3 times, she kills them from commander damage. She puts a bunch of blockers out to protect her Planeswalkers, and a few of the Planeswalkers can make the creatures bigger, allowing you to have quite a nice force of creatures to swing with. Alright, the mana base for these decks, we run 1 of each basic land. We run every shock land, because I do not have the money right now to get 10 original duels. We run the full set of Khans fetch lands in this deck. So a full set of 5 fetches. I only run 8 of the filter lands. There are 2 reasons for that. The first reason is I don't have that much room when it comes to the lands. I do need a few other land types in here. The 2 filters I do not run are the black-white one and the white-red one. For the most part, white is one of the least used colors in my decks, or if it is used, I can usually generate it off of either other filter lands or from my shock lands. I usually find I don't need the black-white or the white-red one in my deck. That's a personal preference. You can run all 10 if you want, you could run less. That's just one of those personal preference things. Sorry about that. These are new sleeves, so they are a little bit slippery. We have Mana Confluence, pay 1 life, add 1 mana of any color. In one sense, it is better than City of Brass. I run Chromatic Lantern, which lets your lands tap for any color. Oh my. The thing about City Brass is whenever it's tapped, it does 1 damage to you, even if you have Chromatic Lantern or Urborg changing the types it makes. I still run it. 1 of any color is still good, especially for 5-color. Of course, we have Command Tower. We have Reflecting Pool. Tap it to add 1 mana to your mana pool of any type of land you control could produce. So if you have a Mana Confluence, a Command Tower, it can tap for any color of those. If you have a Shock Land, it can produce either one of those colors. Urborg, Tomb of Yawgmoth. Each land is a swamp in addition to its other types, so they could produce black in addition to their normal colors. It does affect your opponent's lands too, but that's fine. Gemstone Caverns. If it's in your opening hand and you're not playing first, you can begin with it in play. With a luck counter. Taps for 1 mana of any color if it came into play with a luck counter on it. You do have to exile a card from your hand to use this for it to come into play if you're not going first with it. Now it's more of it in this deck to produce any color of mana. My 5-color decks aren't exactly aggressive decks. They're a little bit less competitive than Captain Sasay and Xenagos. But as I've said, it's in there. It helps with the mana fixing. Ancient Tomb, deal 2 to you. produce 2 colorless. Homeward Path, each player gains control of all creatures he or she owns. Tap to add a colorless to your mana pool. Technically it's not really needed in the Super Friends deck. It's just, I don't really feel like pulling it out, and it doesn't make much of a difference. I don't really have a land to replace it with for Super Friends right now. High Market, add a colorless to your mana pool, sack a creature, gain a life. Once again, kind of the same thing. I didn't really feel like finding another land to replace it with. And sometimes that life gain has actually turned out to be relevant in some of the really late games I've played, oddly enough. Bojuka Bog, it enters the battlefield tapped. When it enters the battlefield, exile all cards from target player's graveyard, and taps to produce black. Now I know I've said I don't like lands that enter the battlefield tapped, but Bojuka Bog is one of the exceptions to that rule. It shuts down Reanimator decks. And you can just crop rotation one of your lands at instant speed to do it, either in response to a Machias Triskelion combo, or someone just reanimating a creature in general, or if they attempt to play Living Death and bring all their creatures back, even though they'll kill everything, they'll have nothing to reanimate. After that we get into our mana ramp. I have Mox, 0 mana, imprint. When it comes into play, can remove a non-artifact, non-land card in your hand from the game. Adds 1 mana of any of the imprinted card's colors to your mana pool. When you tap it, once again, it's partially in there for mana fixing. Just with the lands and the ramps themselves, it's not always enough. So it's just nice to have in there. Once again, these decks aren't super aggressive. Mox Dimond. If it enter the battlefield, discard a land. Yes, this one is proxied. My real one is in Captain Sisay. I do plan on getting one, hopefully within the next few months. But if it would enter the battlefield, you can discard a land. If you do, put it onto the battlefield. If you don't sack it, it taps to add 1 mana of any color to your mana pool. Birds of Paradise, 1 green. Once again, it's another card, just taps for any color. Mana Vault taps for 3, doesn't untap during your upkeep. If you can pay 4 during your upkeep, or it doesn't untap during your untap phase. You can pay 4 during your upkeep to untap it. If you don't, it deals 1 damage to you. Once again, in this deck, unlike the other two, I tend to use it more than once, so occasionally I'll pay the 4 to untap it. Sometimes I'll ramp early, I'll untap it the following turn. The turn after that, just drop like a big Planeswalker or a couple of Planeswalkers. Soul Ring, 1 mana, taps for 2. Exploration, you can play an additional land of each of your turns. It's a 1 green enchantment. I have that in here, but I do not have Burgeoning. Oftentimes I've found that with Exploration, it'll activate once, maybe twice, and that's nice. Burgeoning, I might ramp around the table maybe 1 time if I'm lucky. I've also found that having both in this deck is a little bit redundant. I'll draw into one of them late game when I'm hoping to draw something a bit better. As I've said, this deck's not aggressive, it also just doesn't need both. If you want to run both, you can. That's also a personal preference thing. My preference is just run Exploration. Farseek, search your library for a plains, island, swamp, or mountain. Put it onto the battlefield tapped. So Farseeks can get any of the shocklands, even the ones that do have the forest type, because they also have one of those other types mentioned on there in them. Rampant Growth, search your library for basic land, put it onto the battlefield tapped. Now, I run 5 basics for 2 reasons. The first reason is so I can search them with Rampant Growth. I can Farseek for the basics. But occasionally people will run cards that either destroy all basics or make it so that non-basic lands don't untap. Yes, that'll still hurt us severely, but at least if we have the basics, we can still have a couple of lands to tap each turn. Nature's Lore, search your library for forest, put it into play. Chromatic Lantern, your lands have tap, add 1 color of any mana to your mana pool. This is a 3-drop artifact. You can also tap it to add 1 mana of any color to your mana pool. It's another card to help with the fixing, make sure that we're able to get all of our colors, and it itself can tap for 1 of any color. I'd say this is a pretty essential card to have in any 5-color commander deck. Even a 4 or 3-color deck wants to be running them. Weathered Wayfarer. Sometimes I pull this out, and sometimes it goes in some of the other builds. It's 1 white as a 1/1, pay 1 and tap it. Search your library for a land and put it in your hand. You can only use this ability if an opponent has more lands than you. The downside to this card is sometimes you do ramp out faster and it's just dead. But other times it has allowed me to play with a 1-land hand and just start fetching out other lands that I need, and then being able to get back ahead. Crop rotation, sack a land, search your library for land and put it into play. Oftentimes you're getting Bojuka Bog with it, but you can also use it to get any of the shock lands you might need if you don't have one of those colors. You could get a filter land, if you're looking for one of those. You can get Ancient Tomb. And we have Vampiric Tutor. Pay 2 life, search your library for a card, put it on top of your library, shuffle your library, then put it on top of your library. Just a really powerful tutor card. You can do it at the end of an opponent's turn, in response to Rhystic Study or Mystic Remora. It's a strong tutor. And of course we have Demonic Tutor. 1 in a black sorcery, search your library for any card and put it in your hand. Mystic Remora, it's a blue enchantment. It has an ability called Cumulative Upkeep. What that means is every turn you pay 1 mana, and every turn following that first turn you pay an additional mana. If you don't, you have to sacrifice it. This is at the beginning of your upkeep. Whenever an opponent casts a non-creature spell, you may draw a card, and unless that player pays 4 mana. It's really nice on turn 1. I know you'll be tapping every turn, but sometimes the amount of cards you draw is worth it. Plus you can still tap the land you played into turn if you're getting a land drop every turn. At the very worst, sometimes it'll keep your opponents a few turns from playing things like their Soul Rings or other ramp because they don't want you drawing the cards. Mystic Remora is the card I include in any blue deck that I make, because at the very worst it slows your opponents down, and at the very best it draws you a lot of cards. You can then decide to kill it, and usually you have a full hand while your opponents are getting very close or are empty. That's a very nice card to have in the deck. We have Sylvan Library, 1 in a green. During your draw step you can draw 2 additional cards. If you do, for each one drawn, put 2 cards you drew this turn back on top in any order. At the very worst it functions as a free Sensei's Dividing Top. This card is in my other two decks, which both have green in them. It's just a very strong enchantment. Very worst, it's a free top every turn. And the infamous Rhystic Study, 2 in a blue enchantment. Whenever an opponent plays a spell, you may draw a card unless that player plays 1. It's just like Mystic Remora in the sense that at the very worst it's going to slow your opponents down. At the very best you're going to draw a lot of cards with it. And this one has no cumulative upkeep on it. Path to Exile, 1 in a white, exile a creature. Its controller can search for a basic land and put it into play tapped. It's a standard removal, hits any creature unless that creature has hexproof, of course. So it's the Plowshares, remove a creature from the game. Its controller gains life equal to its power. Same reason we have the Path to Exile, just they gain life instead of searching for a land. We have Beast Within. Once again, one of my favorite cards. I put it in all the green decks I make. You could probably argue this is also a preference card, but I do like that it can destroy any permanent. And the only downside is they get a 3/3 beast. So it doesn't seem like that bad of a downside. Yes, it does the same thing as Vindicate, but Vindicate's not an instant, and Vindicate is 2 colors, white and black. Plus a colorless. Krosan Grip, split second. destroys an artifact or enchantment. While it's on the stack, players can't cast spells or activate abilities unless they're mana abilities. Once again, this stops a lot of combos. You can hit a player who's getting a lot further ahead of you. There are some artifact creatures it can kill too. It's just a nice card to include. This one I wouldn't really say is personal preference. I'd say this one's pretty important to run in any deck that has green in it. Vandal Blast, it's 1 red sorcery. Destroy an artifact you don't control. Overload, pay 4 and a red. You can destroy all artifacts you don't control. Really nice for either knocking out the players getting ahead if there are problematic artifacts on the board. If it's the first turn or two and there's one artifact that's causing you a lot of problems, you can just kill it. If there's one player who has a Soul Ring out and you know they're going to get really far ahead and no one else has one and you don't have one, well, you can kill their Soul Ring, keep them from getting really far ahead in the game. Cyclonic Rift, return a non-land permanent you don't control to its owner's hand for 1 in a blue. Overload, 6 in a blue, return all non-land permanents you don't control to their owner's hands. If you've noticed, there is actually going to be a little bit more removal or board wipes in this deck than I put in my other decks. As I've said, the 5-color deck is slower. Because of that, it does run a few board wipes, a few more than most decks run. I think I run about 3 in my normal build for it. Some of the decks run 4 or 5. But it can be necessary when you're playing a slow deck to keep up. Sometimes you have to clear the board a few times. Toxic Deluge, 2 in a black. As an additional cost to play it, pay X life. Creatures get -X until end of turn. It's nice for killing off small things if you want to keep your big things out. It hits hexproof creatures. Just an all-around, one of my favorite board wipes in the game, if not my favorite board wipe. It's only 3 mana, so it has the advantage on there. You can play it early, you can play it late. It's generally a good card. Sure, you have to pay life, but life's a resource. Deathrite Shaman, hybrid green-black. This card I include in here partially because of the fetch lands that I run, and partially because most people I know do play with fetch lands. You can tap him, exile a land from a graveyard to add 1 mana of any color to your mana pool. You can pay a black and tap him, exile an instant or sorcery from a graveyard. Each opponent loses 2 life. Green and tap him, exile a creature from a graveyard, you gain 2 life. So he does help ramp you ahead. He does function as a mana dork by exiling lands. Also denies your opponents from getting some of them back if they have things like Sun Titan, Crucible of Worlds. He also hits creatures, so if someone's trying to reanimate something, in response to their spell, you can exile what you think they want to reanimate. Occasionally I've used it to exile my own creatures when someone's tried to reanimate them. It's very strong, it's very versatile, it's a very nice card to run in the deck. Eternal Witness, 1 and 2 green. When it enters the battlefield, you can return target card from your graveyard to your hand. But yeah, so you can get anything back: Demonic, Vampiric, Cyclonic Rift, Toxic Deluge, any of your Planeswalkers, if you're playing the Planeswalker build. I have other decks too, and in some of those it also gets back cards. Just a really strong card to run in EDH. Also, Sun Titan can bring it back, and you can start getting stuff back every turn by high marketing it. Mirari's Wake, 3, a green and a white. Your creatures get +1/+1. Whenever you tap a land for mana, add another type it produced to your mana pool. Essentially doubles mana, because pretty much everything in here taps for 1. It buffs your creatures, so it buffs the slivers that I'm making in this deck. In any of the other decks, it'll buff either the creatures that are in there, or at the very least provide me double mana, which is still very nice. Sun Titan, 4 and 2 white, 6/6. When it enters the battlefield or attacks, return a permanent with converted mana cost 3 or less from your graveyard to the battlefield. In various decks it does different things. The worst things it does is return a fetch land to your board, getting you an additional land drop every turn. At the very best, it can bring back things like Planeswalkers, Eldrazi, Sword and Feast and Famine, So it all just depends on the build. And that's everything that's in the core of the deck. Now we're going to go over what's in the Super Friends build. So the first thing I have up here, I run a couple of the oaths. The first one is Oath of Nissa, 1 green, legendary enchantment. When it enters the battlefield, look at the top 3 cards of your library. You can reveal a creature, land, or planeswalker from among them and put it into your hand. And you may spend mana as though it were mana of any color to cast planeswalker spells. So if you have an Ancient Tomb out, that mana can be used as a blue and a red for Dack Faded. Or you could use it for green, or for white, or for red, as long as it's for a planeswalker. It's very handy. If it only had the mana ability, I wouldn't run it. But because you can also look at your top 3 cards and either grab a walker, a creature, or a land, chances are one of those 3 cards is going to be in there, so it nets you a free card usually. We have Oath of Gideon, 2 and a white, also legendary. When it enters the battlefield, put 2 1/1 white core creature tokens onto the battlefield. Each planeswalker you control comes in with an additional loyalty counter on it. It can be very beneficial for some of the planeswalkers that require low amounts of loyalty to ult, like Kiora. She comes in with 2 and she ults at 4. So if she comes in with 3, you plus her once, and your following turn you can ult her if they haven't killed her. Those 2 cores can protect your planeswalkers from being attacked. So Oath of Gideon, one of the better oaths. We have Oath of Jace, 2 and a blue. When it enters the battlefield, draw 3 cards, discard 2. And at the beginning of your upkeep, scry X, where X is the number of planeswalkers you control. At the very worst, even if someone killed this card, or if you have no planeswalkers out, you're drawing 3 cards and discarding 2 for 3. It's not the worst thing in the world. Generally I'll play it before I drop a walker, because a lot of my planeswalkers are 4 and higher. So you drop this, you draw 3, discard 2, following turn you drop a walker, now you're scrying every turn. Since it is a Super Friends deck, it's not unusual to be scrying 3, 4, 5 cards every turn. So it's pretty nice to be able to set up, find more walkers, continue controlling the board, or try to scry into one of your board wipes if there are too many creatures out. I have Mystical Tutor. Search for an instant or sorcery, reveal it, put it to all players, put it on top of your library. Shuffle your library, then put it on top of your library. This is in here to get a lot of the board wipes, or occasionally it grabs another tutor, but normally it's in here so you can grab your board wipes, or occasionally a tutor, but it's usually a board wipe that you're getting. As I've said, creatures can be a bit of a problem when you have planeswalkers out, because they can just attack and kill them. Enlighten Tutor, search your library for an artifact or enchantment, reveal it, shuffle your library, then put that card on top of it. This is in here to get things like the Chain Veil, occasionally an Oath if you really think you need them early on, and it can also get Doubling Season, which allows your planeswalkers to enter the field with twice the number of loyalty counters, allowing most of them to ult right away. So usually you get that one, and then if you already have that, then you can get the Chain Veil. We have Call the Gatewatch, 3 and a white. Search for a planeswalker, then reveal it to all players. Beseech the Queen. This deck does run an extra tutor in it. It can be a bit hard to, if they've killed your planeswalker and you don't have another one to cast, or you don't have much else to do at the time. So it's 2 aura black, 2 aura black, 2 aura black. Search your library for a card with converted mana cost less than or equal to the number of lands you control. Reveal it to all players. It's kind of a strange tutor. A lot of the times when you're playing this, you're gonna be playing this usually on turn 4 or later. So getting a planeswalker with CMC 4 or greater. Supreme Verdict, 1 white, white, blue. Can't be countered, destroys all creatures. Creatures are one of the biggest problems that you'll face in this deck. Getting rid of them allows you to keep plussing your walkers and set up for board control until you can finish the game, or end the game. which can take a while with this deck. Stranglehold, opponents can't search libraries. If an opponent would begin an extra turn, they skip that extra turn. As I've said, Super Friends is probably the slowest, or one of the slowest of all my 5-color decks. Sometimes you need to lock the board a little bit, or just keep players from tutoring up their answers, or their win conditions, so that you can get yours. We have the Chain Veil. It's a legendary artifact, 4 mana. At the beginning of your end step, if you didn't activate a loyalty ability of a Planeswalker, you lose 2 life. You can pay 4 and tap it. For each Planeswalker you control, you can activate their loyalty abilities 1 additional time this turn. I think the card kind of speaks for itself. 2 abilities off of all your walkers every turn is very nice. Even just something as simple as Garruk Wildspeaker untapping 2 lands. Or just Jace drawing 2 cards, or just anything you can do with it is very strong. I don't run the basic Jace, but I do run the one that lets you do mini Factor Fictions, so getting 2 of those in 1 turn. Or untapping 4 permanents, or just anything like that. It's a very good card in the deck. Doubling Season. If an effect would put 1 or more tokens onto the battlefield under your control, you get twice that many. If an effect would place 1 or more counters on a permanent you control, it puts twice that many on. Something to note is only the walkers coming into play get the doubled counters. They don't get additional counters for activating their loyalty abilities. They just come in with twice as many. Memory Jar. 5 mana, tap it, sacrifice it. Each player sets aside their hand and draws 7 more cards. At the end of the turn, you discard the 7 that you drew off of Memory Jar. Each player gets back their original hand. This is something that you almost exclusively activate on your turn. There are some rare instances where you can use it to mess with other players, but generally you use it on your turn when you've run out of cards. You've played all your Planeswalkers down, use this to refill, get a few more, drop a few more down. Or occasionally if you're digging for answers, or if you just have no hand and just want to draw 7 for the turn and see what you can play. Usually you activate it late in the game. You don't want to play it too early because people will kill it or try to kill it, and they will hope that you'll activate it in response. If they do kill it before you can activate it for whatever reason, generally you don't want to activate it in response. You don't want to give them that extra advantage. Deploy the Gatewatch. 4 and 2 green. If anyone remembers Collected Company, this is the same thing but for Planeswalkers. Look at the top 7 cards of your library. Put up to 2 Planeswalker cards from among them onto the battlefield. Put the rest on the bottom in a random order. So you can hit things like Ugin and Karn occasionally. Just getting 2 walkers for 6 mana generally gets them out for less than they'd be anyway. It also works very well with Oath of Jace because it'll scry your upkeep, and then if you see a couple Planeswalkers on the top, you can keep those there, play the Deploy the Gatewatch, get them out. So it's always nice to cheat out a few, or if you don't have that many cards in your hand anyway, let you play them out, so it's nice. We have Dak Faden. Most of the Planeswalkers in here I run because they have nice plus or minus, and they have a good ult. I don't run him for his ult, I only run him for his plus and minus. His +1 is target player draws 2 cards, then discards 2 cards. You almost exclusively use that ability on yourself. -2, gain control of an artifact. So you can bring him out turn 3, steal a Gilded Lotus, a Soul Ring, anything like that, and if he dies, you got enough value off of it to get yourself a bit ahead. But he can steal any artifacts, so nice card. It lets you cycle through your deck. It lets you loot through your deck a little. I like him. I have never used his ult, which gives you an emblem with whenever you cast a spell that targets a permanent, you gain control of that permanent or permanents if it had multiple targets. My only cards that target permanents remove them from the board or destroy them, so it's generally not worth doing. Jace, Architect of Thought, 2 and 2 blue, comes in with 4 loyalty, +1 until your next turn. Whenever a creature an opponent controls attacks, it gets -1, -0 until end of turn. Doesn't even matter if it's attacking you, it just gets -0 period. -2, reveal the top 3 cards of your library. An opponent separates them into 2 piles. Put 1 pile into your hand, the rest on the bottom of your library in any order. In this deck it kind of works out better that they go on the bottom rather than hitting your graveyard, as I don't have that many cards that really get my Planeswalkers back. So if there were 2 walkers and they were in 2 piles, I can grab 1, others go on the bottom. It's also just card advantage. You can get up to 2 cards. Or if you're playing politics, you can try to make a deal with a player, try to get all 3 of them. And his ult is -8 for each player. Search their library for a non-land card, exile it, and then you can cast those cards without paying their mana costs. So you can just play them whenever you can normally play them. So if it's instant, anytime you have priority on the stack. But you can generally steal something big. You can steal an Eldrazi, a Blightsteel, just any big dumb beater that they have. Or you can just steal removal even, or if they have Planeswalkers, or even tutors. It just gets anything if he ults. Sarkhan Val, 2 a red and a green, comes in with 4 loyalty. +1, gives your creatures +1/+1 and haste until end of turn. -2, gain control of a creature until end of turn, untap it and it gains haste. And then his ult is -6, put 5 4/4 red dragons with flying onto the battlefield. Now his ult's doesn't really end the game, but it does give you a lot of really large creatures. His +1 is okay if you happen to have a lot of sliver tokens out, or one of your walkers has made a lot of creatures. And then his -2, gain control of a creature until end of turn. You can gain control of one of their big creatures and swing with it. If it has an activated ability you really want to use, or if you just want to take their creature and high market it so it dies. We have Sorin, Lord of Innistrad, 2 a white and a black with 3 loyalty. He is part of a semi-infinite combo. I'll go over that combo at the end of this video. His +1 puts a 1/1 black vampire creature token with lifelink onto the battlefield. -2 gives you an emblem with creatures you control get +1/+0. -6, destroy up to 3 target creatures and or planeswalkers. Return each card put into a graveyard this way to the battlefield under your control. It says other planeswalkers, so he cannot kill himself, but it's still pretty strong ability. You can use it to either reset your planeswalkers, which is normally what I do with it. If there are decent creatures or opposing planeswalkers out, you can also just take them with it. Gideon, Champion of Justice. He's 2 and 2 white, 4 loyalty, +1. Put a loyalty counter on him for each creature target opponent controls. 0, he becomes a indestructible human creature token with power and toughness each equal to the number of loyalty counters on him. He's still a planeswalker, prevent all damage that we dealt to him, so we can just swing for a lot. -15, exile all other permanents. He is in here for the most part for that ability. He also draws attention away from your other planeswalkers. Other players will see that last ability, and obviously they're going to be worried about that. I've seen it multiple times where I have him and almost any other planeswalker out, and usually they'll target him first. So it's nice if you know they can only attack 1 or 2 other creatures. It's nice in that sometimes I'll play him if I know I can activate him. If I have a Chain Veil, if an opponent has a lot of creatures and I have the mana to activate it. he's also good in the late game if you're able to get him and activate him twice with the Chainmail. You can exile all other permanents, float some mana, drop a few other planeswalkers afterward, and just be ridiculously ahead in the game. We have Kiora, the Crashing Wave. 2, a blue and a green. Comes in with 2 loyalty. +1 until your next turn. Prevent all damage that we dealt to and dealt by target permanent and opponent controls. So you can prevent a large creature from damaging you or your other planeswalkers. Or you can just +1 and target something that doesn't do damage. It doesn't matter what you target. You could target a land with this ability. All that it does at that point, if that land can't do damage, is, well, it still prevents it from doing damage. But you don't have to pick something that can actually injure you or damage you. -1, draw a card. You may play an additional land this turn. At worst, she functions as 2 explorers if you -1 her twice. It is something that occasionally is done. But her ultimate is -5. Sorry about earlier when I said 4, it is 5. You get an emblem with at the beginning of your end step. Put a 9/9 blue Kraken creature token onto the battlefield. It's really nice if you can get that emblem, and then you can ult the Gideon. You're getting free 9/9s every turn. Everyone else has to reset. She also... well, that's actually about all that she does, but she's a nice card to have in the deck, drawing extra cards, preventing damage, and giving you 9/9 Krakens. Narset Transcendent, 2 a white and a blue, +1, look at the top card of your library. If it's a non-creature, non-land card, reveal it and put it in your hand. -2, when you cast your next instant or sorcery from your hand this turn, it gains Rebound. Rebound is an ability that says when you play this card from your hand, I think it has to resolve. Yeah, it has to resolve. But when you play it from your hand, you at the beginning of you exile after it resolves. At the beginning of your next upkeep, you can play it without paying its mana cost. After that, it hits your graveyard. So if it's, say, something like Path to Exile, Swords to Plowshares, Beast Within, you can play them again. You can play a Tutor again. Then we have -9. You get an emblem with your opponent's can't cast non-creature spells. She's good all around. At the worst, you get a look at your top card and possibly put something into your hand, like a Planeswalker or a Tutor. You can -2 her, and she'll let you activate one of those cards again on your next turn. Or you want to try to get most of these walkers to their ults. That's why Doubling Season is in here. Preventing your opponents from casting non-creature spells. It can lock a lot of people out of the game, pretty much set you up for the win, or pretty close to the win. Garruk Wildspeaker, 2 and a green, comes in with 3 mana. +1, untaps 2 lands. Really helps you get ahead when you can do that every turn. His -1 gives you a 3/3 green beast. It's occasionally useful, can help protect your other walkers. -4 gives your creatures +3/+3 and trample until end of turn. It's one of the ways you can win. A lot of these planeswalkers do create creatures. He basically gives you an overrun, and then you can just swing out at other players. Or you can just untap 2 lands every turn. That's also very useful, especially if it's something like Ancient Tomb. We have Ralzeric. He's the core card to that semi-infinite combo that I was mentioning. You have +1, tap target permanent, then untap another permanent, so it can tap an opponent's blocker, can untap one of your lands. -3, he deals 3 damage to a creature or player, so he has Lightning Bolt. And his -7, flip 5 coins, take an extra turn after this one for each one that comes up heads. If you can get his ult off, the chances of you not getting 1 extra turn are about 1 in 32. So it's almost a guaranteed extra turn most of the time. As I said, I'll explain how the infinite or the semi-infinite combo, because as I just mentioned, there's a chance that it does fail. But if it does fail, you can generally try it on the next turn and just keep attempting to take extra turns after that. We have Tamiyo the Moon Sage. Tap a permanent, doesn't untap during its controller's next untap step for +1. She's a 3/2 blue with 4 loyalty. Should have mentioned that first. -2, draw a card for each tapped creature target player controls. This also does include you, so if you have a bunch of creatures, you can just attack somebody, and as long as they don't kill them all, you can then proceed to draw a lot of cards. -8, you get an emblem with you have no maximum hand size, and whenever a card is put into your graveyard from anywhere, you may return it to your hand. Any of your planeswalkers die, you can put them back in your hand. If she is still alive after you've activated the ult, you can put her into your hand after she dies. Just gives you obscene card advantage. You have no maximum hand size, so you can draw as many cards as you want at that point. Anything you're bringing back to your hand, you don't have to worry about discarding. Fencer the Surgeon, or Surgeon, I have no idea how to pronounce that. But anyway, he is 3, a white and a blue for +2. Exile target permanent you own, return it to the battlefield at the end of the turn, or at the beginning of the next end step. I guess that's relevant if you do it at instant speed for whatever reason. -1, creatures are unblockable this turn. -8, you get an emblem with whenever you cast a spell, exile target permanent. He comes in with 3 loyalty. So he's a little bit harder to get to the ult, because even with doubling season, he doesn't get straight to 8. He's nice for resetting planeswalkers. He can reset himself as well, if for whatever reason he goes down to, say, 1. And allowing you to exile permanents when you cast spells, especially in a planeswalker deck. Allows you to get rid of creatures that are threats. It allows you to start maintaining some very nice board control if you have a lot of mana. Just a lot of value. Obnixilis Reignited. Originally he was just in here as a filler while I got other planeswalkers. I've taken a bit of a shine to him. He's 3/2 black, 5 loyalty, +1, draw a card and lose 1 life, -3, destroy a creature, -8, an opponent gets an emblem with whenever a player draws a card, they lose 2 life. I don't use him for the ult. I use him for drawing the extra card every turn or destroying a problematic creature that's on the board. As I said originally, I didn't think he was going to be very strong, but he's turned out to be much better in the deck than I thought. Jace, Unraveler of Secrets. 3/2 blue, 5 loyalty, +1, scry 1, then draw a card. -2, return a target creature to its owner's hand. -8, you get an emblem with whenever an opponent casts their first spell each turn, counter it. So if you have Doubling Season out and you can drop him and no one counters him, you can immediately make it so that the first spell each opponent plays, each turn is countered. That includes if they play a spell during your turn, the first spell they played gets countered. So it affords you some protection on your turn. They have to play 2 cards for any 1 card they wish to resolve. Yeah, and returns creatures to their hand, and at worst he's scrying you cards, and then you get a draw. So Vraska the Unseen, 3/2 black, comes in with 5 loyalty. Once again, even though her ult does create 1/1s that can kill people, she is also one of the planeswalkers I don't run specifically for her ult. She has +1 until your next turn. Whenever a creature deals combat damage to her, destroy it. -3, destroy a non-land permanent. That's a big part of the reason she's in here. She can -3, eat a permanent, +1 on the next turn, so that if anyone tries to attack it, it dies. Her ult is put 3 1/1 black assassin creature tokens onto the battlefield with whenever this creature deals combat damage to a player, that player loses the game. As I've said, that is a strong ult, but they are only 1/1s, and they have to get through your opponent's creatures. Yes, there are a lot of ways to get them through here. Yes, Venser makes them unblockable. I still don't feel they're all that strong. They're a real pain in the butt to get out if I don't have Doubling Season. If I do, I still have to get past their blockers. And Venser, I think, is the only walker in here that makes my creatures unblockable, so I have to have both of them out. So she's usually just in here for the -3, and then if they attack it, they lose their creature that attacked it. Next we have Teferi, 4 and 2 blue, +1, look at the top 2 cards of your library, put one in your hand, the other on the bottom, -1, untap up to 4 non-land permanents, -10, you get an emblem with, you can activate loyalty abilities of Planeswalkers you control, anytime you could play an instant, and during any player's turn. He can technically be your commander, it's one of the things on him, but that's not really relevant. And he comes in with 5 loyalty. You can go infinite with his -1 if you have the Chain Veil, a Mana Vault, a Soul Ring. The problem is I don't run the Planeswalker at the moment that lets him go infinite. It would be one of the Ajanis puts loyalty abilities on Planeswalkers. So you would just keep doing that, and then he would eventually, you would just keep putting abilities on him so he doesn't, or counters on him so he doesn't die, netting a bunch of mana, playing other walkers, and you would just keep going until you won. But I don't run that Ajani at the moment because I don't have it. I've considered putting it in, but we'll see how it goes. Elspeth, Sun's Champion. She is 4 and 2 white for 4 loyalty. +1 puts 3/1/1 white soldiers onto the battlefield. -3, destroy all creatures with power 4 or greater. -7, you get an emblem with creatures you control get +2/+2 and have flying. So her +1 gives you 3/1/1s, they protect your other walkers. They start building up after just a couple of turns, and you start having a nice force that you can swing with. -4 destroys all creatures with power 4 or greater, so if you're playing something like against something like a Xenagos deck, or just even a mono green deck, or just someone who has a lot of large creatures, you play her, kill them all, then you start plussing her and protecting her from other smaller creatures. You have the -7, so it'll make all your creatures bigger, makes your sliver tokens 3/3s with flying, makes her soldiers 3/3s with flying. So not only is she just a strong planeswalker in general, she works really well with just herself. We have Sorin Markov. This one is a personal preference card. I like it because I just kind of get a kick out of the card itself. He's 3 and 3 black for 4 loyalty. +2 deals 2 damage to a creature or player and you gain 2 life. -3, an opponent's life total becomes 10. -7, you control target player's next turn. It is nice if you can get that ult off and take control of someone's next turn. My favorite thing about this card is I just think it's funny. It's also kind of rude to set a player's life total to 10. It does say target opponents, so you cannot target yourself. But if someone's at 40 and they've been killing your walkers off, you just drop this, set them at 10. You can also, there are some players that can gain infinite life. Well, after they've done that, you can make them manageable by playing him out. +2 to a creature or player and gaining 2. It's okay, but it's really not that good. If you have the doubling season or you somehow get to being able to -7 him, taking another player's turn is always really nice. He's one of 4 cards in the game that allow a player to control another player's turn. The other 3 being Mindslaver, Worst Fears, and Cruel Entertainment, which Cruel Entertainment doesn't give you control, it just makes 2 players control each other's next turn. So I guess technically you can control theirs if they control yours. But that's the only turn control card we run in here. Karn Liberated, +7 mana, 6 loyalty, +4, target player exiles the card from his or her hand, -3, exile target permanent, -14, restart the game, leaving in play all non-aura permanent cards exiled with Karn Liberated, then put those cards onto the battlefield under your control. So you can either use them to remove threats that your opponents have on the board, or you can use him and actually try to restart the game with him. I think I've only restarted the game with him once or twice. Obviously when people see what he does, restarting the game, potentially letting you have large creatures or other walkers in play, as you can exile your own planeswalkers with him. It's quite a lot of advantage, so he's one of those red flags. People see him, they're going to try to get rid of him. Oftentimes I just run him to remove threats from the board, because he can -3 twice before he dies. Or you can -3 +4 and keep doing that. We have Nicol Bolas, one of the big villains of Magic. 4, a blue, 2 blacks, and a red for 5 loyalty. +3, destroy a non-creature permanent. -2, gain control of target creature. -9, he deals 7 damage to a player. That player sacrifices 7 permanents. Or that player discards 7 cards and sacrifices 7 permanents. So it's a devastating ult that completely obliterates someone's board state. Gaining control of a target creature is also very strong. And his +3 destroys a non-creature permanent. So no matter what you do when you first bring him out, he is making a very large impact on the board. He costs a lot of mana, but it's a very fair trade-off when you can take a creature, instantly kill a permanent on the board, or if you're able to ult him, completely decimate someone's board, someone's hand. The 7 damage isn't super relevant, but making them sack 7 permanents and discard 7 cards is. And our last planeswalker is Ugin, the Spirit Dragon. 8 mana, comes in with 7 loyalty. +2, he deals 3 damage to a creature or player. -X, exile each permanent with converted mana cost X or less, that's 1 or more colors. -10, you gain 7 life, draw 7 cards, then put up to 7 permanents from your hand onto the battlefield. If you can get his ult off, generally you're putting at least 2 or 3 additional walkers onto the board. Because it's +2 and his ult is -10, he would generally still survive that unless he's been dealt damage. And at worst, you -X him. Generally that's the first thing you do, is you exile a bunch of permanents when he comes out. Usually freeing the way for other planeswalkers to come out. And if you do 6 or less, then he's still alive. So I did mention that this deck has an infinite combo in it. It's only a somewhat infinite combo in that there is a 1 in 32 chance that it won't work. But it involves Doubling Season, Ral Zarek, and one of 3 other planeswalkers. The first one is Ral Zarek. So he comes in, while Doubling Season's out, he goes to 8, can immediately -7. Flip 5 coins, take an extra turn for each one that comes up heads. Once that happens, you then have the first one is Sorin. Sorin comes out. He comes out with 6. Now the only one with Sorin is you would either have to have an Oath of Gideon out, or you would have to hope you get the extra turn. But you can -6 Sorin, killing Ral Zarek, who lives after casting his ult, or using his ult. Kill him and bring him back. You could just do it for the one-time effect, kill the Sorin, bring back Ral Zarek and try to take more turns. It's not truly infinite though, unless you have a counter on Sorin so he can live. And even then you'd have to put more counters on him, so it's not quite infinite, but it does give you an extra go with Ral Zarek. The next one would be Venser. Exile a permanent you own, then return it to the battlefield. You can just keep resetting Ral Zarek every turn back up to 8. As long as Ral Zarek gets 1 or 2 extra turns after that, you can just keep taking more turns generally, and you keep resetting him, so even if it fails you can reset him back to 8 and on your next turn try again. The other one is with Tamio, if you can get her ult off. You would have to have some way to either deal damage to Ral Zarek while this is out, or just some way to kill him in general. But whenever a card you control is put into the graveyard from anywhere, you can return it to your hand instead. So if you played Ralzeric, then you had something that killed him, like one of your other walkers that deals damage, like Ugin. You could activate him, then deal 3 to him, and then play him again on your next turn. Alright, and that is our video on our first 5-color deck. This one was a bit longer, the other ones will be a bit shorter. I am only going over the core of this deck in the first one. In the following ones, I'm only going to be going over the cards that are different between each of my 5-color decks. Let us know if you have any questions, comments below, or if you're wondering why I'm not running specific walkers or cards. And thank you everybody, and we'll see you in the next video.